All right, well, this is the panel where I'm going to talk about my novel and writing and science fiction and stuff like that. If anyone thinks that this is something more fun than that, then you're wrong and you should go elsewhere. But anyone who wants to talk about literature and, you know, punctuation, formatting, stuff like that, here I am. So anyway, my name is John Patrick Lowrie, and you may know me as the voice of the sniper in Team Fortress 2, or just the husband of GLaDOS in Portal games, or, I mean, I've done about 27, 28 computer games, but I also wrote a science fiction novel called Dancing with Eternity, and you can see here's the artwork for the new audio book of the novel that's coming out this spring, read by Ellen and me, and I'm really here just to have a panel about writing and publishing and stuff like that. How many people here are interested in writing? So cool. How many have written stories, fiction? How much of that has been fan fiction? So really pretty much all original stories. That's great, that's great. Has anyone ever embarked on writing a novel and finished? So you have, huh?
First of a trilogy, I finished it.
Great. And are you shopping for an agent at this point?
Yeah, I've sent up to 3.
Yeah, and that's I think that's the hardest and most grueling part of writing is getting an agent. I never did. I found a publisher before I found an agent, so I still haven't found an agent. I think that a couple of things. Someone once told me that good characters are much more important than good plot. In fact, good characters can get you through a bad plot more than a bad plot can get you, or than a good plot can get you through bad characters. For those of you who do write, how many write improvisationally and how many tend to outline before you write and then fill in the outline as you go?
Very basic story outline, mostly improvisation.
Anybody else?
Chapter by chapter outline of what I'd like to happen, and then it's like, fuck it all, I'll do it.
I previously to 30 ml of whiskey off the go.
There you go. Yeah, I mean, personally, I was a jazz musician before I was ever a writer, and so I'm very much into improvisation. I tend to have a vague idea of what the plot is going to be, but I think that there was one author who wrote a novel I think she went to Italy and wrote a novel, and then where she was burned down with the novel inside it, and someone asked her, well, are you going to rewrite it? And she said, no, I couldn't do that. I know how it ends now. And so I think that it's important to surprise the reader, and the only real way to surprise the reader is to surprise the author. So I think that improvisation is very important. I tend to come at writing also from a classical music standpoint of form. How many people here understand how form affects music and how form affects writing? How many people care? Yeah, okay, so I mean, I think that you know, a classical sonata allegro form is exposition, development, and recapitulation. I think that every story is basically has the same form as a good joke. That you have a setup and you have a payoff. How we put questions in the reader's mind that need to be answered, and then how we answer those questions defines how good the writing is. If the answers are surprising and yet inevitable, I think that's the best kind of writing. But here is where good characters can help you out, because if your characters are interesting, you'll want to know what happens to them, even if the plot isn't that important. You know, there are wonderful books about, you know, Jane Austen, a family living in a house hoping to get the daughters married off, and really nothing much else happens, but we love the characters so much that carries us through the story. If you go to a lot of bestsellers, sadly, I mean, they tend to be very plotty, and you know, this happens, and that happens, this happens, that happens, this happens, but you really don't care about any of the characters, and when those stories get made into movies, they tend to be mediocre movies too. So I can't stress enough how important character development is, and I think that, I mean, there are a lot of different ways to go about that. You know, you can go with the Jungian archetypes. and stuff like that. But I tend to kind of filter people I know through those archetypes. So when I was starting out writing Dancing with Eternity, yes, go ahead.
So that's these sort of feeling versus there's 4 states and there's 2 of each that are the aspects.
Right. Yeah. And those, those can just tell. Okay, I already have a character like that. I need now a character like this. One who's more in his head, one who's more in his heart, one who's more a person of action, one who's more a person of the phlegmatic characters. I forget all the names for them, but there are people who tend to sit around and gab and not do anything, and there are people who don't say anything but always take action, stuff like that. When I was writing Dancing with Eternity, one thing I was determined to do was to write a science fiction story with just as many female characters as there were male characters. Because the most casual glance at the human race will show you that that's pretty much the split of sex. And when we watch a lot of science fiction movies, and really a lot of stories, the kind of classic...
It's a hero with a thousand faces, not a heroine with a thousand.
Right. We tend to want a heroine. We may want a heroine and a whore, which gives us 2 women, and then a whole bunch of men competing for the heroine and trying to survive the whore. But the thing that I've seen over the last 40 years is that we are allowing our storytellers to give us much more complex female characters. So that, no female character is either a virgin or a whore. They're all just basically people like everyone else. And particularly, I think, with anime and game playing and stuff like this, and particularly sci-fi, have introduced women who take action, women who take, who carry weapons, who get into fights and all this kind of stuff. And so I think that makes it, it's much easier to market a story with women who take action than it used to be. And I think that's a great thing. But that was one of the things that I was determined to do in Dancing with Eternity, is to have, and of course, coming from a theater background, I tend to think of characters that people would enjoy playing. Yes, ma'am?
I was going to say, you talk a lot about characters, but what about world building? Because sci-fi is vast, and you can create your own things out of nothing. What's your stance on that?
Okay, well, all right, so let's get into that. Now, the question I always start with is why say anything at all? Because that's kind of the question I start with as an actor as well. If you're going to build a world, what's the purpose of the world? And there can be many purposes. It can just be escapism. We can build a world where all the trees grow barbecue chickens and the streets are paved with candy and everyone just has sex all the time or something like that. And it's just an escapist world. The problem with escapist worlds is that they tend to not have any problems. And I've read a lot of fan fiction that tends to go down that road. It's like, oh, it's really cool, but what's the problem? Why are we there? I think that Isaac Asimov once said that science fiction is the one form of literature that even bothers to ask these 3 questions, never mind try to find answers for them. Those questions are, what would it be like to have this or that gadget? A rocket ship, a time machine, something like that. What might things be like if they continue in the direction they're going, which is what I call extrapolated fiction, which I'm very much interested in. And then the third question is, what would we look like to people who had never met us, the alien viewpoint? What would human beings look like to people who didn't have any of our biases at all? And I think that if you keep those 3 questions in mind when you're world building, you can have an awful lot of fun. I mean, this is where steampunk comes from, right? What would it be like if we didn't really progress beyond late 19th century machining technology, where we're still using oak and brass and gears and stuff like that to make our machines, but we did all these cool things with them, and that gives us an alternate reality, which is a lot of fun to look at. But once you go there, you have to figure out a reason why you're there to have a story to I mean, one of my favorite movies is Howl's movie Castle, which is, all about steampunk and wizardry, but it's not really about that at all. It's about love and loss and healing. So that's the challenge, is to write characters who need to get to somewhere else, physically or emotionally. They need to go somewhere. if you introduce a character that we all think is good at the beginning of the book, at the beginning of the story, and in the middle of the story we still think is good, and at the end of the story we still think is good, we haven't really gone anywhere. Now you can get away with that with superheroes and stuff like that, but even Marvel has found that superheroes are a lot more interesting if they're screwed up in one way or another. You know, if Spider-Man can't figure out how to have a girlfriend, if, you know, the mutants and the X-Men are all messed up emotionally, it makes for better storytelling. It's harder to tell a story about Superman when the only problem he has is that he misses his mom and dad. You can go a certain distance with that, but then you really have to get into Lois Lane and, oh, they want to have sex but they can't because, you know, his penis would absolutely kill her or whatever, you know, I mean, but you have to figure out, you know, what are the problems? What are the problems? Why does your reader need to keep reading the next chapter so that he can find out whether the characters that he or she cares about are going to be okay or not? And it's just as important to develop characters that you want to be not okay as to develop characters that you want to be okay. Because some of the most fun can be had when the characters you originally want to be okay turn out to really need to learn a lesson, and the characters you really want to be not okay turn out to be saved somehow. So it's these kind of journeys that make writing in the large scale work. But getting back to world building, what do we want to do when we build a world? We've already talked about escapism and stuff like steampunk, where we just go to a different direction where that is fun. The kind of world building that I've always been interested in is what I call extrapolated world building, which takes things that we do now and extrapolates them into the future. So, in Dancing with Eternity, what I see we doing now is having liposuction and breast augmentation and shooting collagen into our faces and stuff like that. You know, what would happen if we took that to the ultimate extreme of being able to get into our DNA and redo our DNA so that we could look any way we wanted to? What upsets us now is we read in the papers that people have died or people have been raped. Those are the most upsetting things that can happen. And I thought, what if there was a world where that never happened? Those things never happened. What would we do then? And once again, if it's just everything would be fine, then you don't have a story. As a matter of fact, I still want to write a short story that the first sentence is, once upon a time in the far distant future, a very smart person finally solved the last problem, and after that, everything was fine. Where do you go from there? Well, I've gone some very perverse and weird places, but you have to. But I think that that in world building, you have very rich material all around you. You know, if you're just on the M1 and you're stuck in traffic, and you think, well, what would it be like to not be stuck in traffic? What would that look like? What would we do then if we never got stuck in traffic? We're moving, 800 miles an hour, 4 inches away from the car in front of us, and we get to every place on time. What would our problems be? That has to immediately be your next question, is what would the problems be? In Dancing with Eternity, I thought, the big problem we have is with not understanding each other. So what if we really did figure out telepathy and prescience and all that kind of stuff and how brains work, and developed a telepathic internet so that you could actually get inside another person's mind and see what was happening from their perspective? Well, for one thing, rape would be impossible. If a woman is getting raped, all she has to do is hop online. All of a sudden, the whole human race is seeing the world through her eyes. There's no way that the rapist is not going to get caught, and not only that, but everyone is getting raped by this one person, and everyone is upset with this one person. And so rape goes away. It's like, but on the other hand, you always know if someone is emotionally upset. If somebody is unstable, if somebody is lonely, if somebody is horny, you say, okay, well, how do we take care of this person, whoever they are? And so how does that work? And as I was writing Dancing with Eternity, I had these two things going on, where if somebody seemed lonely or horny or stressed, or somebody would offer to have sex with them, just to make them feel better, and all of a sudden the human race started resembling one giant old married couple.
I was about to say, this stopped kind of line.
Yeah, right. It's like all of a sudden, sex is no problem. It's like nobody has to be horny. It's like if you want to watch a TV show, you can always have sex later. And it all gets very comfortable somehow. And so, but once again, so it's happening. What's the problem? What are the problems? Well, now this is something that I considered, and in my world, I didn't want it to be a dystopian in that way. I mean, you can certainly say, there are lots of Big Brother future worlds where, there's so much information that we know every time you go into the bathroom, and that wonderful planet in one of the volumes of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, where they had so much tourism that the planet was being eroded, and so if you didn't actually poop a certain amount, they would cut off a certain amount of your body flesh so that the planet wouldn't get smaller. But you can have fun with that sort of thing. But I decided in this that really you could voluntarily open up your mind whenever you wanted to, but still close off any part of it that you wanted to. Because I thought, okay, what would I do if I suddenly had the password to someone else's computer? Well, I could look around, but how long would it take me to really find everything on that computer, go through every single file, and maybe find the one important thing? It's easy to hide things, even when we have the passwords. So I thought, no, people can have enough privacy, and they can just decide when they want to log on and when they want to log off. But if no one dies, and everyone talks to each other all the time, do we still have babies? And I decided, well, maybe we don't. Maybe, and particularly, how much would it cost to live forever? How much would it cost to actually get rebooted every 60 years to go back to being 20 years old? And I just figured it would be enormously expensive because I wanted to comment on the state of healthcare, particularly in America. I mean, you guys have it figured out a little bit more than we do, but it's insane over there.
We are trying very hard to get to where you are.
Yes, yeah. But and I thought, if it's so expensive to keep yourself alive, maybe you don't spend money on children. And if there's no impulse to keep to keep the family heritage going, the family name going, everyone's going to live forever, why have kids? Well, the one reason to have kids is that the corporations wanted to open up new planets, and they needed labor, and so they just started harvesting everyone's eggs and sperm when they were, got to puberty, and started making their own kids. And so how does that work? Now we don't have families anymore, and this is another thing that I extrapolated. I thought that more and more people were putting their kids into daycare earlier and earlier. There was no one at home, everyone was out working, pursuing careers. What if just everybody did that? That children were raised from the very get-go by professionals. They never knew their mothers and fathers. They had no real connection to that kind of thing. Everybody kind of came out of a classroom. What would that do to people? And so all of a sudden, just from these two things, nobody dies anymore and everybody's telepathically connected, you have all of these ramifications. What happens if this happens? What happens if this happens? What's happened to religion? No one's dying anymore. No one gets to go to heaven. No one gets to join their honored ancestors. No one gets to meet Allah and have their 17 virgins or whatever it is. Does everybody want to do that? Does everybody want to buy into that? What happens to gender relations? We don't need each other to reproduce anymore. Do we like each other? Do we decide not to hang around each other? So it's just lots and lots and lots of stuff to explore. So I think that the most important things that you can be a student of for world building are the sciences, history, and politics. I think that if you know those three things, because you look at how World War I started, say, just a random point in history. World War I was such a weird thing, and if you look into it, all of the motivations were so emotional and so irrational, and it created such a catastrophe for the entire continent. How did we get there? People obviously aren't very smart, because, Europe was the crown of creation at that time. It was the highest technological, political, literate art place that had ever existed anywhere, and yet, Europe blew themselves up once and weren't satisfied with that. They went back 20 years later and blew themselves up again. So those kinds of things can really help. I think that one of the things that writers get themselves in trouble with is trying to make sure that all of their characters' actions make sense. Because people, to a large extent, don't make sense. And we as writers can have a lot of fun exploring why that is. Why, in this particular person's case, do they make these kinds of choices? Why is this person impulsive and this person is plotting? If only this person would be more impulsive, if only this person would be a little bit more plotting, they wouldn't get themselves into trouble. But by God, this person is going to be impulsive, and this person is just going to go step by step by step by step, even though the shark is eating them as they go. Let's see, I think if I just figure out a way to swim faster. How would I do that? Oh, I don't have any legs left because the shark just ate me. But those kind of things can really give us interesting ways for our characters to interact and get frustrated with each other and fight with each other. Because I think we all know that for storytelling, the one thing we have to have in storytelling is conflict, right? I mean, that's the most basic form of storytelling. We can have conflict on a universe-shaking level. Hero versus skull guy, Skeletor.
It's like, Romeo and Juliet, that's a classic antagonistic relationship, Capulets versus Montagues, there's your setup already.
Right. We have something that can't happen,
And you
that
never
is happening.
you never actually find out what the feud started over. All you need to know is that they are feuding.
Right, but that's not the conflict, really. The conflict between the Capulets and the Montagues is not the conflict. The conflict is that there is a feud, and yet Romeo and Juliet have fallen in love. That's the conflict. That these two people want to get together, and they can't get together. And so that's, from an actor's standpoint, an actor is always looking for, what do I want, and why can't I have it? If you don't have that, you don't have anything to play. So if you think about every one of your characters, and even the smallest character, even someone you meet just briefly, you can draw a little bit of tension in them. Yes, sir?
Could you say, when you're writing your antagonist, that when you're writing a character that he's going to be your antagonist, that the question could be, what do I want and how do I get it? To make another Shakespeare reference, Richard III. Because for pretty much 2/3 of the play, he is going about, he is telling the audience what he wants, and he's also showing them how he gets it.
Right. Well, of course, but when he's talking about how he gets it, what he's really describing is what his obstacles are and how he's going to overcome them. Right. And you look at a Sherlock Holmes mystery, what he wants to do is solve the crime, and his obstacles are gathering all the knowledge he needs. And the interesting thing for us is to see how he does that, and particularly his wonderful intuitive leaps and stuff like that. And of course, we have when we're writing that sort of stuff, our task is to never have our hero or heroine be supernatural. You can't cheat. You can have a person be very smart, but you can't confuse intelligence with knowledge. No matter how intelligent they are, they have to have some way to get the knowledge they need in order to solve the puzzle that they're solving. So, any questions? I've been yakking for a long time. Yes, sir?
Are there any literary traps or cliches or things that you either find particularly tiresome or things that you'd like to see more, particularly science fiction or literature in general?
Well, I think that the definition of a cliche is something that has been overused. And the problem with a cliche is that we all know how it's going to turn out. If you're going to use cliches to set something up, make sure that you go someplace else with them. But this is, Harlan Ellison once told a class of his, I can't turn you into a writer, I can only turn you into a better writer. You have to have something to say. And if we go back to zero every time, we go back to zero and say, why say anything at all? From chapter to chapter, from sentence to sentence. Why say anything? Is there any reason to say anything about these people? Because we have to, if we don't have a reason to talk about them, we're just gabbing. And a lot of people will read, my wife does this very funny bit where she does a dramatic reading of a Harlequin romance novel. And it's just drivel. But people will read it. It's very comfortable. And you can make a lot of money writing drivel. But ultimately, to me, it's very empty. And I think that, from my point of view, there's so much noise in the world now that if we as writers want to add to that noise, we better have a pretty darn good reason for doing it. Because we can use our skills to create something that will sell. Or we can use our skills to create something that is meaningful to us. And at the end of one process, we will have money, and at the end of another process, we will have spent a certain amount of our time living to our highest ideals. And each one of us has to decide which one of those things is more important to us. There are lots of people that think money is great because then I can buy gadgets and have sex with other people who have money or something. I don't know how it works really. I remember back, you know, when I was a fusion guitarist and living literally from gig to gig, you know, living in a place that I was paying $75 a month for, that had a bathroom that was slowly falling into the backyard, and we had a great time. You know, and you think about all the great blues that has been written about just barely surviving. And all
John
the...
Lee Hooker, Mr. Lucky.
What's that now?
John Lee Hooker, Mr. Lucky.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely, yeah. And so we think, but well, of course, this goes back to the short story with the initial line about solving all of our problems. We don't really want to solve all of our problems. We just want to solve the problem in front of us right now. Because if we solve that problem, what happens to us? We're immediately bored. We immediately find something else to complain about. If we have $1 billion and somebody else has $1.001 billion, well, what's so cool about this? I should have $1 billion, you know. So that, you know, but those are things to write about too. Is the absurdity of these human questions, and that's what I'm interested in, and that's what Dancing with Eternity plays around with a lot. I mean, I thought about calling it an absurdist fable because it really is just a series of reductio ad absurdum arguments. What if you take this to its logical extreme? But ultimately, if it doesn't have heart, if it doesn't have something that just makes you cry or makes you laugh, if you're doing one of those things at a book, you know the book has got you. And if you're just reading it, you know the book kind of hasn't gotten you. And, you know, I mean, what are the Star Trek movies that we like the most? The Star Trek movies that make us laugh. Because if we're laughing at those characters, when they get in danger, we're worried that they might really die, and we won't get to laugh with them anymore. And that makes their survival very important to us. That great scene in Jaws, I don't know if you remember the movie Jaws, where they were telling stories on the boat, and the audience laughed at the story, and all of a sudden the shark, you know, bammed up against the wall and broke through it, and everyone was screaming, going from a laugh to a scream. You know, that's a wonderful twist. One thing, of course, I'm just a prankster. I mean, I love fucking with people. And so misdirection is something that I love to do. And there's a couple of instances in that in dancing where you set up something where the audience thinks, oh, I know completely what they're talking about. And it turns out, no, they're talking about something completely else. That can inform the audience about themselves. And ultimately, that's what we want to do. We don't want to inform the audience about us. They don't care. There's no reason they should care, except that we resemble everyone. You know, we share 99.9% of our DNA, we share almost all of our emotional responses and stuff like that. Each of our paths is unique, and so each of our perspectives is going to inform everyone else's. But I like to say to young actors, the difference between acting and psychology is the difference between looking at the ocean and looking at a painting of the ocean. If we look at the ocean, we see a beautiful ocean. If we look at a painting of the ocean, we see that we're not the only ones in the universe. We're not alone. Somebody else sees the same ocean that I do. And when we write a good story, that's the most important thing we can give to our readers is, I am not alone. I'm not the only one who is heartbroken. I'm not the only one who is lonely. I'm not the only one who wishes I had more money. I'm not the only one who is petty. I'm not the only one who is heroic. I'm not the only one who is pathetic. All those things. And every single human being has all those things in them, and every single character ought to as well. The story will be better if they do. And this is why women were rightly exasperated with all of the nice women in stories. It's like, how many nice women do we have to see in movies? I mean, yes, okay, we all want to be nice, and we all want to be attractive, and all the guys want to have us, but they're just nice 24 hours a day. They're boring. I'm going to blow my brains out, you know. So it's, and for an actor, for a female actor to play one of these characters, the challenge is always to figure out how to three-dimensionalize these people. Make them just a little bit annoying somehow. I'm sorry?
That's why Lady Macbeth's so good to play.
I'm sorry.
You use another Shakespeare, you know, reference. Lady Macbeth is, you know.
Oh, yes.
You know, that's why everybody likes to play it.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Because, you know, she's not the heroine, but she is, kind of, in a weird way.
Right. Well, and why people really enjoy playing the nurse in Romeo and Juliet.
Yeah.
Because she's so flawed. You know, she's kind of simple and just keeps throwing things out and stuff like that. And of course, to make another Shakespeare allusion, what is one of the most important scenes in Macbeth is the messenger scene.
Yeah.
Because it's so completely hilarious.
Yeah.
There's nothing. If you go to Bohème, you go to La Bohème, Puccini's opera La Bohème, the whole first act is nothing but goofing around and falling in love, and it's all just happy and jokes and all this kind of stuff. If it wasn't that in the first act, the fourth act would be sad. So, you know, any good actor will tell you, you always play comedy like it's tragedy. You always play tragedy like it's comedy. You need that. If you're playing tragedy like it's tragic, we're all going to get bored 2 pages in. If you're playing comedy like it's funny, there's no point. Because all humor comes from pain. All humor comes from pain.
There's nothing more serious than making people laugh.
Right, right. I once told a friend of mine, he was trying to write a show, I said, the only difference between comedy and drama, or comedy and tragedy, is tragedy says, we fuck up. Whereas comedy says, we fuck up. That's it, you know, that's what we're talking about, the ways we screw up. If we didn't screw up, there'd be no stories. We'd always ever do everything perfectly, there'd be no problems, and we'd all be automatons.
In your book, you've got people who sign up for work doing planetary tectonics.
Right.
And then the bodies they get put into, get re-sleeped into, they're actually reduced in capacity, aren't they? So they can stand the life they have to live.
Well, it's not even crueler than that. They're reduced in capacity so that they'll do what they're told.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
No one would willingly.
Right.
If you live forever and see the universe, why would you live in a hole going fucking play tectonics? You know?
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's, you know, once I came up with the idea that everyone was living forever, the first thing I had to do was figure out why that would suck. And so I said, okay, not only does people live forever, but it costs a lot, and most people can't afford it without basically selling themselves into slavery every other life. Now there's a price. Now it means something. Now we have to say, why would people do that? Would I do that? Would I work as a slave for 60 years to get 60 years of freedom? And then you start thinking, well, I work from 9 to 5 as basically a slave for a weekend of freedom, so maybe I would. And those kind, when you can bring those kind of questions to, and that's what I think that science fiction is good for, is giving us that odd perspective, that weird perspective to look back on our lives as they are now. Yes, sir.
Just on the subject, you know, of science fiction, you know, this is something I struggle with myself. I mean, you know, the series that I'm writing at the minute is, you could technically classify it as science fiction, as in it takes place, you know, on other worlds. But I don't, you know, I struggle with the actual science side of that. So how much actual science would you need, to expand upon? You know, how much basic science would you need?
Right. Well, I mean, if you take examples of authors that have been successful, you can go from the Arthur C. Clarkes, who are scientists, to the Ray Bradburys, who are writers. But Ray Bradbury basically listened to other people and said, yeah, we could probably get to Mars someday. Great, I'm going to write the Martian Chronicles. Okay. And it's all going to be about loneliness and watching the Earth blow up in a nuclear war at the end of the story. You know, right? You know, and it's an incredibly moving story, and yet it's science fiction. People are living on Mars and stuff like that. But it's not Robert Heinlein science fiction. If you want to get from Earth to Mars, you have a ballistic trajectory. You need so much fuel. He knew all that kind of stuff.
Really analysed it.
He has an entire chapter just about firing missiles at near light speed.
I'm sorry.
Robert Heinlein in Forever War.
Yes.
He has an entire chapter.
Oh no, that's Joe Haldeman.
Joe Haldeman.
Right.
He has an entire chapter about if you're travelling at nearly light speed and they're travelling at nearly light speed and you fire a missile, well, you can't actually see where they are, so you have to guess where they are, but they're guessing where you are. So they're firing missiles where they think you think they might think they are that you are.
It's a battleship.
It's even worse. It's like 60 pages of just him going, math.
And the storyteller's challenge is to make that fun.
Yeah.
He doesn't.
And well, right. But on the other hand, he has this great, Joel. I don't know if you've read The Forever War, but he has this great perspective of having been in Vietnam in the military. And so when they need to go faster than light, what is the first thing they have to do? They have to fill every body cavity with this disgusting glop, and it's awful. And it's a cheap way to do it. It's a way the military figured out to do it, and they didn't care that it was uncomfortable the soldiers. So that's commentary on human behavior, not physics. But it's kind of physics too, so you can have a lot of fun with it. So once again, what's the good joke? What's going to make people laugh? What's going to make people go, ew, you know, what's going to cause a reaction?
They figure out how to do it more comfortably, the later parts of it, don't they, when he's been injured.
Right, oh yeah.
And they go, well, we can do it comfortably now. The military goes, and? It's like, well, no, we can do it, and?
Right. But then you take somebody like Douglas Adams, who has a great, I would call it, Sunday supplement level understanding of quantum mechanics and theoretical physics and stuff like that, and just has a great time with it because it's also absurd. And you know, I like to start out talks about my book about saying, you know, that I wanted to develop a science that was as weird to us as quantum mechanics would be to Sophocles or Aristotle. Because you know, my favorite thing about quantum mechanics is that quantum mechanics tells us that the only reason that all of you people don't fly up through the ceiling into outer space right now is that you probably won't. That's it. And so.
And yeah, the Planck constant, it's like, there is a chance, however small, that you will fall through the floor and melt into the
Right, exactly. It's just a very small chance. And so, but you can have fun with that. The trick is to have fun. You know, if you don't care where the story goes next, and you're going, oh God, what am I going to write next? You haven't done your job yet.
So it's kind of like what Jim Butcher said, you know, said that your job as a writer is to get people to keep turning the page.
It's the only job.
Yeah. So,
Right.
You know, he said, yeah, you've got to go to bed obsessing about what's happening on the next page, as opposed to, you know, I'm going to bed now because I'm so bored with the book.
Right. And, you know, the nicest reviews that I've gotten for my book is where people say, okay, I couldn't put this down. I ended up, you know, being late to work the next day. Yes, ma'am.
If you could write in any other genre, what would it be?
Oh, I mean, everything. My problem is I just have this garbage can brain.
What do you mean, if he's got infinite potential?
But I think that the thing that I aspire to is to write literature. But I think that I'm just such a scamp that I will always want to mess with people. And whatever I write will always be, you thought this was happening, but you're just a stupid human being. And guess what? The author is a stupid human being too. And so we're all on this bus together. So.
When you think someone's saying one thing and says something,
Right. Well, of course, yes, ma'am. We haven't heard from you yet.
Sorry, just a quick question. Do you set yourself a goal to write a little bit every day, or do you just write as the fancy takes you?
Yes, I do set a goal to write a little bit every day. I also set a goal to lose a little bit of weight every day. And both goals work out just about equally well. So yeah, set goals. I think it's good because then you spend a lot of your time feeling bad about not having met those goals every day. And the more that you beat yourself up, the more miserable you are. I have no idea how it works, you know. Some people really, you know, sit down and they just have a work ethic. And I come from a country that was founded by Puritans, and Puritans were sick fucks, let me tell you that right now. And this whole Puritan work ethic of, you know, achieve, and, you know, career. And then you meet a guy who spent most of his life fishing, and he's almost achieved, you know, nirvana. And here you've been, you know, killing yourself the whole time. So, if you don't have anything to say, do everyone a favor and don't say it. If you have something to say, you're not going to be able to keep from saying it. I think the challenge for a lot of people, and particularly a lot of young people, is to understand that they have a right to their own voice. And I think that this is something that we've been really working hard in Western civilization for the last 50 years on, is making sure that black people have their own voice, gay people have their own voice, women have their own voice, everyone has their own voice, they have the right to speak. Because the one thing that is tragic to me is when someone has something to say and feels that they shouldn't say it, because people will dismiss them, will deride them, and sometimes it takes an awful lot of courage to say what you have to say.
On that point, how do you handle criticism? Because I've heard one of the biggest things about being in any creative field is handling people saying you suck.
Right, well, now there are two kinds of criticism. And I think it's very important for every writer, every artist, to understand the difference. There is constructive criticism. I get what you're doing. I don't think we need this much of that in this chapter, but I really think we need a little bit more of this because I don't understand that part.
So I have a problem. I get very.
But that's constructive criticism. Well, right. Well, and we all do. But I think that if we separate out that kind of criticism from what I call not enough balloons criticism, which is well, I really like balloons. I think your story ought to have more balloons. Well, go write your own story. You can put as many balloons in it as you want, or puppies, or whatever it is.
Kind of what happened with the Man of Steel film. There was a lot of hardcore Superman fans who didn't like the fact that he didn't have the red pants. Who cares? It was a great film.
Right, exactly. And so as an artist, you have to separate out those two kinds of criticism. And basically, I tell actors going into auditions that the most important thing any artist can have is what I call a healthy contempt for the audience, which is basically going into a room saying, these people are either cool enough to get me or they're not. And yeah, just to some extent, but fortunately, I think almost everyone is stupid. So if anyone has anything to say bad about me, you didn't get it. No, it does. Some things they just cut through. Really? No, you couldn't have thought that. This is a genius. This is a masterpiece. But yeah, everyone goes through that. We had some hands up back there. Yes, sir.
Because I'm a little late coming in, so I may have missed this question already. From the time that you thought, hey, I'm going to write a book, to you having that book in your hands, how long?
I have led a very eventful life. I wrote the initial scenario in 1997 after we were audited by the IRS. I don't know what you call it over here, but it's the Internal Revenue Service.
Her Majesty's Revenue Customs.
Yeah. And that was such a totally Kafka-esque experience that the first scene is this guy sitting in a bar because the System Revenue Service has frozen his accounts. And then I wrote from 1997 to 2000, early 2001. I was on a national tour of the Diary of Anne Frank, and the van that we were in flipped, and one of the cast members was killed, and two others were grievously injured, and it sent me into a severe suicidal depression that lasted almost 4.5 years, where I didn't get any work done at all. And coming back from that kind of hiatus, particularly when you're writing a book about death, because let's face it, any book about a future where no one dies is a book about death. That's all it's dealing with. When you just experienced violent death right in front of your face, it changes you completely. And so getting back into it, it took me a good 1.5 years, if not 2 years, of just rereading, and trying to reconstruct where I originally wanted to go and where I needed to go now before I got back into the saddle. And then I finished it up in 2009. So you could say it took 12 years, but I would say you have to cut 6 years out of the middle of that. And so it left 6 years.
So once you finally got that book, that must have been quite a relief almost?
Well, yeah. I mean, imagine giving birth to a baby that's been gestating inside you for 12 years. Anyone who's gestated for 9 months knows what that might be like, yes.
On the topic of editing, do you edit as you write, or do you just have to write a chapter and then go back? Because I have trouble with, I'll write this, but then I'll go, no, I don't like this, I want to change it, and then I want to change it, and never get anywhere.
Right. I think it's important to honor the two types of human creativity. In music, it's what I call being on the page and being off the page. Some people can play music on the page, read music, they're fabulous, they can play any symphony, any sonata. They can't play jazz to save their souls. Other people are great improvisers, can't play classical music to save their souls. Then there's some musicians who can do both. You can't tell me that one of those musicians is better than another. So I tend to write improvisationally, which means that I tend to constantly go back and say, oh, I just had another idea. And sometimes, there was a couple times in Dancing with Eternity where I got to chapter 27 and had an idea that affected something that I said in chapter 8. And I had to go back and fix it. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, you're just writing. So I think there's nothing wrong with editing as you go along. For me, when I got to the end of the book, it was a finished book. When I gave it to the publisher and the editor went through it, it was like, this is in great shape. Not only, I mean, the spelling, punctuation, grammar, everything is in great shape. We don't have much to edit here. They did a little bit, but not much. But I would say don't worry about it. It's whatever, however you work, you know. Some people just need to get it done. No, I can't go back. I'll spend forever on chapter 3. I just need to write the book and then go back and figure out what's wrong with it. That works too. There was another hand back here. Did someone just get tired or bored? Okay, yes sir.
How important do you think it is to convey a message in your plots? Do you think it's better that you start off wanting to, you know, build a story around this message, or do you have a story and then if you can fit the message in there, you know, which would you think is better?
Right. Well, I think that as a novelist, as a playwright, as any kind of storyteller like that, if you have a particular point of view you want to get across, your first job is to develop a character who has the opposite point of view that's just as smart as you are. I just saw a show that was a reading of a show about John Muir, the great naturalist who, you know, promoted Yosemite Valley and all those kind of things. And the only thing wrong with the play was that the playwright thought John Muir was a great guy.
Yeah.
And there's no drama. You have to have a viable opponent. You can't have good guy always facing straw men whose arguments are easily knocked aside.
It's kind of like, I used to work in the theatre, and a friend of mine, he wrote a short theatre piece about Jim Morrison, and the various different personalities he had in the psyche, you know, Old Man Blues and, you know, people like that, you know, Dionysus and the Lizard King. And the way he portrayed Jim Morrison was that he was an absolute asshole. You know,
right.
Because, you know, that was the point of it.
This is how we can get into him.
I mean, he himself was a nice guy, you know, the guy who wrote it, but you know, the way he had Jim Morrison portrayed is that he was a dick. You know, and that worked out better because, you know, the audience had it. You know, he had the audience with it.
But anytime we have a message, we have to have a viable argument for the opposite message. You know, even if we're writing about slavery is bad, we really need to have somebody in there to tell us how good slavery is and really make a strong argument so that we're at the point of, maybe I was wrong. The best thing I could do is go to poor people and buy them so that at least they will have a roof over their head and food in their stomachs because I'll put it there.
So it's better to have, like, it's good to have your own personal argument put in there, but you have to justify it with others.
The more powerfully you're going to be able to put your argument is if you argue against it really, really, really
You
well.
can't keep it one side. You have to have them sort of locking horns.
Well, the problem with a message, a piece, whether it's a play or a book, is that everyone who agrees with you will be bored because they already agree with you, and everyone who disagrees with you will be pissed off because they didn't hear their side of the argument in your book. And so I saw a great piece about abortion, where this young woman was captured by, and we have plenty of them in America, these religious fanatics and anti-abortion fanatics, and they were going to keep her in the basement until she had the baby. And it was just these two women, the one woman who was pregnant and the woman who was keeping her there. And they had an argument about abortion the whole play. And both people were very compelling. And at the end of the play, you just came to the conclusion that abortion was heartbreaking. And that neither of these people were completely right. But I think that, but that was my conclusion. Maybe somebody else came up with a completely different conclusion. Maybe somebody else said, oh, the religious person was an asshole, and the woman who was trying to have an abortion was a hero, and and someone else would say the abortion lady was an asshole. But it's important to leave those kind of decisions with the reader. I think that's our job. We paint the ocean. We don't say the ocean is good or bad. We say the ocean looks like this. Yeah?
I don't know how many people have read your book in here. At the end, when you do the reveal about the removal, I'll just call it that. Yeah. Did that come from anywhere? Because there's the idea about as communication increases, extreme ideas increase in your book. And I didn't know if there was you had any personal experience of that, or anywhere that was linked to?
Well, yes. I think that any author who doesn't write somehow autobiographically is cheating his audience, cheating her audience. Our richest trove of information is our own experience of the world. Our job as authors is to make sure that whenever we get an opinion, that we research the opposite opinion. Because, in America, you just turn on Fox News, you get lots of people with one opinion and no knowledge of why that opinion might be wrong. Even might be wrong. And I think as authors, as storytellers, we need to know. We need to know why we might be absolutely full of crap. Robert Heinlein has to, in Glory Road, they have to kill a dragon. What happens right after they kill this dragon? They hear the dragon's baby crying for its mother. Oh God, it wasn't a good idea to kill the dragon after all. Okay, and those kind of turns can be wonderful in a story. But I think that's our job, when we all do it as well as we can. I thought I saw someone else's hand up, maybe I didn't. No? How are we doing on time? I don't want to keep this here. 10 minutes? Okay. Any other questions? Yes?
Of course, you're famous for being involved with and a major complaint that's been leveled at interactive is that narrative and story characters are very weak. Your roles and Mary's roles in particular are examples of non-weak characters and bringing character and life to what is essentially an entirely what could be a very characterless experience. So, what do you feel would be? How would you feel that interactive media would be better served in terms of the storytelling potential? Grabbing ideas or
right. Well. I mean, the whole idea of adventure games, even before they had computer games, but these games where you get so far in the narrative and choose another paragraph to go, making a story interactive. But when you talk about computer games, we need to not forget the word game. Because you can play chess, and every one of those pieces doesn't really have a personality, any other than what we imbue with them. And so there is a part about game playing that is simply competitive. I think what people like Valve do is realize how much fun it is when the character that you're playing or the character that you're playing against is a right asshole and is, insulting you and taunting you and being really petty and vicious and stuff like that. Once again, it's allowing us to observe ourselves.
But also enhancing camaraderie. I like to support the characters in my team to the fortress because I like this thing.
Right. And I think that there is the possibility for storytelling in computer games, and like engineers will always tell you, 90% of everything is crap. The best is always the top 10%. Everything else is going to be worse than the best. Something like Portal has such a compelling story, but nobody knew that it was going to be there. It's just that the writers are really good and they put it there.
Kind of like The Witcher as well. Those were based on the Andrzej Sapkowski books, but they just made phenomenal games from them, from the source material.
Exactly.
They were actually good in gameplay as well. And to get back to the writing thing, you actually cared about the lead character that you're playing.
Yeah, an excellent instance of that is in the Myst 3, where you get to the end and you realize that you can either kill off this bad guy or reunite him with his family that he's lost. And the figuring out how to keep him from killing you and reuniting him with his family is such an uplifting moment. That's great storytelling. And so I think there are wonderful opportunities for putting it in there. Once again, we have the market forces always dragging us down to the lowest common denominator. We know that if we have big tits and lots of blood in a game, we'll sell a certain number of copies, right? We know that if we have exhilarating, ennobling moments, people may or may not care about them.
The other thing with computer games, remember the games in there,
Mm-hmm.
count what that often is, like you have the writing industry and the games industry.
Right. And industries work like industries. They're creating products, and products are not art. They might be. You can make any product art. I like to say that human beings don't do things well. We do things well enough. Whenever we do something better than it absolutely has to be done, we call it art. And I think that's a pretty good, if something is, wow, that wasn't just a movie, that was a really good movie. That was even better than that, that was art. All art is an accolade. That guy really saw things that I didn't see coming. He saw me the way I've never seen me. And he illuminated me in a way that I never thought I was going to be illuminated. Yay for him. And I think that's what we all aspire to. But that shouldn't keep any of us from writing. Because maybe some of us, even in here, are only writers to the level that we can write really nice stories for our 3-year-old daughter. What the heck is wrong with that? I used to teach guitar lessons, and people would get, just down on themselves because Jimi Hendrix or, whoever, Al Di Meola was so much better than they were. I said, man, you've had 3 lessons. You're a better guitarist than 99% of the people who've ever lived. You can go home and play a song for your kids. They have live music in their house because of you. Shut the fuck up and learn how to play the guitar.
Was your follow-up then, no, I would not teach you a stairway to heaven?
Oh, okay, you could always tell. You could always tell how well my band was doing. If my band was doing well, and you came to me and said, hi, I don't really want to learn how to, technique or exercises or learn how to write music or anything like that. I just want to learn Stairway to Heaven. And if my band was doing well, I would say, oh, well, you need to take lessons from this guy. He's just down the street. He'd love to teach you that stuff. If my band was doing badly and I didn't have the rent, I'd say, sure, I'll teach you Stairway to Heaven, what the fuck. so that's, and look at Dickens and, who's the guy who wrote Les Mis?
Victor Hugo.
Yeah, Victor Hugo. These guys were trying to make a living.
Roald Dahl. His famous thing, I hate children, but I love money.
Right. Yeah. Well, and he said, I don't call them children's stories. Publishers call them children's stories to sell them. I just call them stories.
Well, they used to get him to read as children at Great Ormond Street and that one. And he'd turn up, and he was like a massively tall, terrifying looking man. And he'd be like, you're going to die, you're going to die, you're going to die.
But, ultimately, art can be utterly self-indulgent. And that's what we want to avoid. I think every one of us tries to be a useful human being. We're either useful to other people or we're not. And I like to say that opining is to thinking as masturbation is to sex. They feel the same, and there's a lot of activity, but at the end of the whole process, nothing of any importance gets produced. So we can opine all we want, but if we want to think, we need to make sure that something of importance gets produced at the end of the whole process. Nothing wrong with masturbation. Go ahead, masturbate now, I'll turn around.
In fact, we're out of time.
Okay, great. Thanks so much for coming, guys. I have business cards up here if you haven't bought my book yet and want to, or if you want to burn the card because as a protest to my entire team, they're right here.
When's the audience?